It's May 1621 on the island of Banda Nera in the Banda Sea, Indonesia. The air should be sweet, heavy with the scent of ripening fruit and tropical flora. Instead, it carries the smell of fear and sharpened steel, the kind of smell that tells you that the meeting you've been invited to won't include tea and biscuits. 44 village elders, the Orang Kaya, have been brought here from across the archipelago to a clearing in front of the unforgiving walls of Fort Nassau. They're about to be executed by Japanese mercenaries hired by the Dutch East India Company in an appalling example of early corporate outsourcing. The man who's ordered this restructuring is Jan Pieterszoon Koen. He's the Governor General of the company, a man not unduly burdened by empathy. His business plan is brutally simple: total monopoly or total erasure. In the coming weeks, the population of the Banda Islands will drop from 15,000 to a few hundred. Entire villages are being wiped off the map, not for gold, not for land, but for the seed of a single tree. A seed we now keep in a kitchen drawer next to a half-empty packet of dried oregano. Why did the Dutch East India Company decide to commit genocide for an eggnog garnish? This is a bizarre story of 17th century war and economics, extraordinary land swaps, international cuisine, and a hallucinogenic drug. The source of the chaos is the seed of the tropical evergreen tree Myristica fragrans. Many plants provide one product and expect a thank you note. The nutmeg tree, however, presents a botanical buy one get one free offer. It's the only fruit that produces two distinct spices from the same anatomy. When the apricot-like fruit matures, the fleshy husk splits open like a clamshell to reveal a hard, dark seed, the nutmeg. It's not actually a nut, although a 17th century spice trader wouldn't have been terribly bothered by botanical pedantry. Fun fact: nutmeg became slang in the 1870s for deception because of the naughty practice of adding false wooden nutmegs to add weight to imported sacks. The word is still used in sport today. To nutmeg is to kick a soccer ball between the legs of your opponent and regain possession on the other side. Back to our botany lesson. The nutmeg seed isn't naked. It's wrapped in a scary-looking lacy red cage called an aril. It looks like an apricot dressed as a dominatrix. This red stuff is mace, also a spice, the more subtle B-side to nutmeg's hit single. For millennia, the nutmeg tree grew in only one place on the entire planet, a tiny cluster of volcanic specks in Indonesia called the Banda Islands. Because it was so geographically locked, whoever controlled those islands effectively held the access codes to the world's most profitable flavour. And in the 17th century, the people who wanted those codes were prepared to trade away the future of the Western world just to stop their rivals from having a nibble. By the mid-1600s, the Dutch were importing up to £500,000 of nutmeg each year. The price of a nutmeg reaching a kitchen in Amsterdam was hiked by 60,000%, the kind of profit margin that makes modern pharmaceutical companies look like charitable organisations. But at that time, the British were a persistent fly in the Dutch ointment. In the aggressive competition for access to Spice Islands, the Brits had seized a tiny, nutmeg-rich rock in the Banda Islands called Run. It was a tiny speck, but it was their speck. The Dutch were furious. They wanted the British off their nut turf. In 1667, the two superpowers sat down to negotiate the Treaty of Breda to end the Second Anglo-Dutch War. The British agreed to hand over the island of Run to the Dutch. In exchange, the Dutch gave the English a cold, swampy, beaver-invested trading post in North America called New Amsterdam, which was promptly renamed New York. At the time, the Dutch thought they'd absolutely fleeced the British. They walked away with a handful of seeds and a smug sense of victory. Of course, they had no reason for knowing it at the time, but they had traded the future financial capital of the world for a slightly better grip on a luxury spice. Manhattan, which centuries later was to become home to Wall Street, Central Park, the Metropolitan Opera and Katz's Delicatessen, was merely the consolation prize. The Dutch had the monopoly they craved, the British had a swamp. History, as it turns out, prefers a swamp to a monopoly. But for the 17th century Europeans, the monopoly wasn't just about greed. They were convinced that this dense nut was the only thing standing between them and a terrifyingly painful death. Why were we so desperate for this seed? Partly because nutmeg is what you might call a stealth spice. It's an invisible pillar of global cuisine. Without it, bechamel sauce is just wet flour. It's the rounding note in Swedish meatballs, the secret warmth in haggis, and the richness of moussaka. But also partly because in the 17th century, it wasn't just a culinary choice, it was a medical necessity. In a world before germ theory, people believed disease was carried by miasma, bad-smelling air. Carrying a nutmeg in your pocket was the 1600s version of a flu jab. People would use it in a pomander, a fragrant collection of spices in a perforated metal case in the expectation that the pleasant aroma would protect them from the plague. Look, you can't blame them. This was before anyone had discovered germs. 300 years later, there's no excuse for thinking a bouquet is better than a vaccine, but let's not go down that rabbit hole.
And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do, either through the skin or...
Back in the 1600s, if you could afford to grate nutmeg over your food, you were performing the ultimate flex. It was like having a diamond-encrusted toaster. It didn't actually make the toast better, it just reminded your neighbours that they were much worse at being rich than you were. A fashion emerged for carrying a silver pocket grater as a high society status symbol, like an Hermès handbag. Imagine being so pathologically pretentious that you carry a tiny silver grater just in case someone serves you a drink that isn't sufficiently fragrant. But as those aristocrats sat there, smugly rasping their luxury nuts over their evening punch, they were blissfully unaware that they were dosing themselves with a potent chemical that was about to turn their polite dinner party into a 3-day psychological odyssey. While the aristocrats were showing off their silver graters, they were playing with a potent psychotropic. And let's be entirely clear, for the benefit of the legal department and your own digestive tract, do not try this. If you're currently standing in your kitchen with a measuring spoon and a gleam in your eye, put it down. Nutmeg isn't a fun weekend activity. It could be a toxic car crash. The culprit is a compound called myristicin. In small amounts, it's a culinary delight. In large amounts, it's a profound neurological misunderstanding. If you swallow roughly 5 grams, about a tablespoon of the powder, you're not about to embark on a journey of enlightenment. Your body attempts to metabolize myristicin into amphetamine-like compounds, but it does so with all the grace of a toddler trying to fix a Swiss watch with a hammer. The resulting nutmeg intoxication can last for up to 60 hours. That's nearly 3 days of your life, during which time seems to slow down to the point that a 3-minute pop song feels like a geological era, while your heart tries to beat its way out of your ribcage. This state of prolonged misery was famously documented by Malcolm X, who used nutmeg to survive the crushing boredom of a prison cell. He described it as a way to make time pass, but he also noted the physical toll was devastating. It's less of a trip and more of a metabolic hostage situation. And while lacing mashed potatoes with hallucinogens would stop Uncle Frank talking about the election, mass poisoning your dinner guests is generally considered rather poor form. While the world was tripping its way through the 18th century, the Dutch were finding that no amount of violence could keep their secret locked in the East Indies forever. The Dutch monopoly was broken when nutmeg mysteriously found its way to St. Vincent in the Caribbean in the early 19th century. It was an estate manager called Frank Gurney who, in 1843, managed to smuggle seeds out of Banda and plant them on the island of Grenada. Gurney brought a world-altering commodity into the country because he thought the trees would look nice in the garden. He unintentionally launched a national economy while trying to improve the view from his veranda. His timing was perfect. By the mid-19th century, the West Indian sugar industry was in a death spiral due to the abolition of slavery and falling prices. Grenada's planters were desperate for a new miracle crop. The plant that refused to grow anywhere else suddenly fell in love with the Caribbean soil. Nutmeg was such a success in Grenada, earning it the nickname the Spice Isle, that it became a stylized feature on the country's flag. What a lovely tribute. Perhaps the UK should put fish and chips on the Union flag. Nutmeg is the grated crown on a rum punch and the soul of jerk seasoning. Today, the global nutmeg market is an industry worth over $1.4 billion, an industry whose cruel historic origins have been thoroughly laundered. When you buy an innocent little packet of nutmeg in the corner shop, the massacre of the Bandanese people or history's craziest land swap are probably not at the forefront of your mind. Today, we associate nutmeg with log fires, oversized knitwear, and heavy custard. But in reality, the jar in your cupboard has the bloodiest hands in the kitchen. Nutmeg led to genocide in the East Indies and fueled the first global megacorporation. Were it not for this seed, Manhattan might have ended up as a beaver reserve, which, considering the current state of New York rent prices, might actually have been the more humanitarian outcome for everyone involved. The next time you stand in your kitchen with a grater in hand, consider the sheer weight of that little brown nut. It's a silent witness to the dramatic lengths people will go to for a bit of flavour. And it may be the most dangerous thing that you own that doesn't require a license.